Yeah, thank you everyone for attending today. I know it's all pretty crazy times at the moment, so great that everyone has been able to take the time out to listen and learn, I guess, from some industry leaders. My name's Dan Hilson. I'm the CEO of Energy. We're a business that helps people decarbonise their fleets. And I'm also the chair of the Charge Together program, which is, I guess, the program that's offering these webinars and trying to help to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. I'm sorry if it's cutting in and out today, by the way, because obviously bandwidth's at the moment, but bear with us. So Charge Together was formed by Electric Vehicle Council and ourselves, and then along with people like NRMA, Ausgrid. Arena was a major funder, and also South Australian government. And in this webinar, we'll hear from two global leaders in electrification. So Renault has been leading the space since 2009. They've got fanatical user groups. I was in the UK, and I can attest to the fact that there's ZOE fanatics around the world who know every aspect of these vehicles. For example, they've got 215,000 vehicles globally. Elena is the product manager and passenger for SUV Renault Australia. And she was one of the first global product managers in Paris. And DHL needs no introduction. Obviously a global leader in logistics. They have a Grow Green program in Australia in pursuit of zero emissions by 2050 and are very proactive from the top down to make that happen. David Lucas is the sourcing manager for DHL, has been intimately involved in the process of electrification. So we'll get started, and for those that haven't been on before, we do take questions, but just type them into the chat, and then at the end we'll ask those questions of the guys. So I'll hand over to Elena, and looking forward very much to your presentation.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. So, well, I've been introduced by Dan, so I won't continue with the introduction, other than say my name's Elena, as Dan said. Today, I'm going to take us a little bit through Renault's electric story globally and then locally, and hopefully in the process answer the questions you may have. But as Dan said, we've got time for questions at the end. And then David's going to take us through his experience integrating electric vehicles into the DHL fleet locally. So, a quick history of the electric vehicle. So I just wanted to touch very quickly on this, obviously, but 1828, there was an early motor used to power a model car, and in 1881, we saw an electric car on display next to Edison's light bulb and Bell's telephone. In 1912, about a third of the vehicles in the world were electric, 38% in the US, had a top speed of 32 kilometers an hour, so we weren't breaking any sound barriers with them, but they were the technology of the day. A few years pass. They fell out of mass production with the invention of the combustion engine, and their range and their cost meant that the combustion engine took over. But in 2010, with new battery technology, better range, we saw a new generation of electric vehicles arrive. For the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to sort of talk about, well, to start with, what is an electric vehicle? It's obviously a vehicle fueled by electricity. It has battery power, but then there are some distinguishing features. You've got hybrid electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, a battery vehicle with range extender, a battery electric vehicle, and a fuel cell electric vehicle. So today I'm going to be talking just about battery electric vehicles, so 100% powered by a battery, as that is what we have Renault in our range of vehicles at the moment. So Renault and e-mobility. To start off with a quick introduction to Renault. It is not one of the larger players in Australia. However, worldwide, it is part of the largest automotive group in the world, as part of the Renault-Nissan-Mitsubishi Alliance. It was established over 100 years ago in 1898, and it's now represented in 134 countries. The Groupe Renault sold just under 4 million cars last year, of which 62,000 of them were electric. And Renault's electric story has been developing for many, many years. So in 2009, Renault announced its €4 billion EV program. In 2011, then it launched the first Kangoo Z.E, 100% electric, and that won Van of the Year. In 2012, it launched ZOE with a real-life range of 200 kilometers. And then to illustrate the battery evolution and development, ZOE was launched with an update in 2017 with a real-life range of 300 kilometers. In 2018, Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi launched the Alliance Ventures, which is an investment capital firm which is targeting business model innovation in new mobility. So Renault continues to innovate in the sector. And last year, even it launched 2 new vehicles, Twingo Z.E and City K Z.E, which is a China-only vehicle. So as Daniel mentioned, we've got more than 213,000 electric vehicles on the road through Groupe Renault. In 3 figures then, 1 in every 4 electric vehicles sold in Europe is a Renault. By 2022, we will have 8 all-electric models, and there will also be 12 electrified models offering full hybrid technologies. On the bottom of the screen then is our range of vehicles as Renault commercializes the widest range of electric vehicles. We have, from left to right, the Twizy, a 2-seater urban mobility scooter, for want of a better word. Twingo Z.E, as I mentioned, was launched last year in Europe. ZOE, Kangoo Z.E, ZOE and Kangoo I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, and our Master Z.E vehicle. I guess the fact that you're all connected on this webinar is because you're already curious about electric vehicles and hopefully already familiar with the appeal of them. Firstly, the driving is quiet, and I say in more ways than one because it's not just quiet for the driver. There are no vibrations. So when they're at a standstill, it's actually quite a smooth moving parts, so there's no friction. Sorry, I want to make sure my connection's okay. So the driver experiences a whole new level of I guess silence really while he's driving, and not just the driver, everyone around. So when you're driving in a city, the noise is cut quite substantially when you're driving an electric vehicle. Driving is responsive, so this is a myth from early on in the days of the launch that what we're launching a little sort of steady go-karts, whereas actually driving is quite responsive. You'll find that you're not really compromising on your driving pleasure when you're in these cars. They've got a smooth and linear acceleration, which is very responsive and very quick off the line. They have a low cost in use with up to 40% less electricity cost and maintenance. And an interesting one is that they have no more diversions. So rather than having to go somewhere to fill up as your gas station, you're actually filling up where you go, be it home, be it office, be it shopping center. You don't actually have to go off the route to fill up, which some fleet companies or fleet managers have reported as being quite good, because that means there's less downtime for their drivers. And then from a sustainability impact, of course, you're leaving nothing behind because these vehicles are zero emission. It wouldn't be an electric vehicle presentation if I didn't touch on range, which is obviously still a worry for many people considering electric vehicles. So I just wanted to touch on this briefly. Range is affected by 4 factors as per any conventional engine vehicle, several of which are driver influenced. So the speed. Driving a steady, low urban speed suits these vehicles best. That's when you'll get the most range out of them. Driving fast, motorway driving is, as you would expect, it's a higher steady speed and it will drain the battery a lot quicker. Topography, so you will use more energy as you're going uphill. I think that's self-evident, but I wanted to explain. When you're going downhill, however, the vehicles tend to regenerate their battery. So it's not quite so bad going downhill, but uphill you will use it. That's obviously something that your driver cannot control. So it's worth noting where you live or where you intend to drive the vehicle if you're looking at these vehicles. Heating and cooling then, as with a combustion engine vehicle, if you turn on the air conditioning, it can use up to 10% of your energy. Whereas in a combustion engine vehicle, you've got a battery that can help and recharge. You're in an electric vehicle, you're using the only battery that there is and the only source of energy to drive the vehicle. And finally, then driving manner. This has a huge impact on the range. And we would highly recommend that drivers adopt a sort of eco driving manner in order to optimize their range. This is something that can be taught or learnt, which allows drivers to get the most out of their electric vehicles. In general, though, we see that the average Australian commute is 16 kilometres a day. And what you'll see when I'm presenting both of our vehicles is that our vehicles fall well within that commuting distance, which makes them quite a comfortable vehicle to own and drive. Another pop charge, we plug it in. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, I agree, but I thought I'd share it anyway. A little bit of technical information. I hope this isn't going into too much detail, but people will tend to ask, how fast can I charge? So charging speed is defined by 3 things. You've got charger output, and chargers can now deliver anywhere from 3 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts of power. Anything under about 43 kilowatts, which is up to your fast in the green on the graph, can be delivered through alternating charge, AC power. Anything above that, up to the 350, is DC power, direct current. Vehicle input. So the manufacturer can actually set what kilowatts the vehicle can accept, which obviously affects the charging speed. And finally, battery size. Again, something set by the manufacturer, the size, the weight, the cost, the desired use ratio is everything that the manufacturer will consider when he puts battery into the vehicle. When we talk alternating current then, this is the current that the grid, it's a quick electricity lesson, but the grid delivers power to the vehicle directly. So it's easy to access as alternating current is the grid power. The charging equipment tends to be, can be more basic, sorry. But it can be smaller and cheaper because you are effectively plugging straight into what the grid is delivering. It is limited in power by the previously you're only going to get up to a maximum of 43 kilowatts, but more likely only about 22. So this sort of charging solution is generally found on domestic or commercial installations. Direct current connects directly to the car's battery. So the battery accepts DC. So when you're charging the car with alternating current, there is a converter in the car that needs to convert it to DC. Whereas if you're taking DC current directly, the converter is in the charging unit. So the charging unit tends to be larger, and it is a more of a substantial investment. And these are the units that we see in the long distance public infrastructure, so on the super highways, in the destination chargers. They power up a lot more, so they can provide a much faster charge than AC. That's a very quick electricity lesson. I hope it was useful. I don't want to vehicles then. Renault Australia, we have the Kangoo Z.E. So it has a battery size of 33 kilowatt hours. It delivers a range of 200 kilometers, and it has a power of 44 kilowatts and 226 newton meters of torque. So there are many anatomical differences moving from an electric, from a combustion engine, to an electric. But as I mentioned before, you don't compromise on your driving experience. While that max power of 44 kilowatts might sound quite low, the peak power and the torque are available from the start. So it's not like the lag that you experience when you leave the a standing start. You have the torque and the power immediately, which means you are off quicker. So you don't notice the power of 44 kilowatts feeling like it would if it was in a regular combustion engine vehicle. In terms of Kangoo, then, we get up to 4 meters cubed of load volume. It's got a payload of 650, and it's got a 7 kilowatt onboard charger. It's very practical in that it's got left and right sliding side doors, and it's got a solid steel bulkhead. Our decision for the solid steel bulkhead is so that if you are cooling or heating the driver, you're only heating that driver's compartment rather than the whole van, again, to optimize your range. You can choose different configurations. That's just what we have as standard in the vehicle. So top 3 questions I get on Kangoo Z.E. What's the range? So we have a World Harmonized Light Vehicle Test Procedure, WLTP, of 230. In real world, Kangoo Z.E delivers around 200 kilometers. How long does it take for a full charge? So I mentioned it has a 33 kilowatt hour battery. It has an onboard charger that can take up to 7 kilowatts, which means, divide one by the other, it's going to take about 6 hours for a full charge, 0 to 100%, which is very rare that someone is going to do that. The good thing about these batteries, both ZOEs and Kangoos, is that they're lithium ions. So a bit like your mobile phone, they don't have a memory. Whether you charge them for 20 minutes or 5 hours, you're not going to lose capacity on the battery. Finally, how much does it cost for a full charge? It's a bit of a tough one because it really depends what electricity rate you're paying for kilowatt hour. To give you an idea, then, I've looked at a 20 cent per kilowatt hour and a 40 cent per kilowatt hour. You times that by the size of the battery. And so for Kangoo, you're looking at from $7 to $13, depending on what your kilowatt hour rate is. Kangoo Z.E then is a total reflection of Kangoo, which is the popular LCV, compact LCV options already in Australia. It's just 100% electric. So the loading capacity is the same. The battery is positioned under the floor, so it hasn't impacted on the area. And the loading capacity then is 650. The dimensions are identical. There's nothing that's been changed in order to electrify the vehicle, and no compromises for you. If say you run a Kangoo-sized vehicle, then you're not going to have to compromise anything to move to electric. And one of the benefits, as it says in the bottom there, that lowers the vehicle center, improved road holding with the vehicle. So then for peace of mind, we've got a vehicle warranty of 3 years, a battery warranty of 5 years, up to 100,000 kilometers. We haven't currently got cap price servicing because the service costs for an electric vehicle are much lower than our comparative cap price servicing policy. And then just there you can see how Kangoo Z.E would compare to our previous Kangoo petrol in terms of consumption, the sense that you're going to pay. If you're doing 20,000 kilometers a year, you can see your energy cost is just over a third less, I should explain. It's a third of what you would pay for the Kangoo petrol. And same with the servicing costs. You can see it's just under half. So lots of benefits to moving to Kangoo Z.E. Our other vehicle then is Renault ZOE. ZOE then is a light vehicle, takes 5 passengers. She's a beautiful little car. I'm not biased in any way. Has a battery of 41 kilowatt hours and delivers a range of about 300 in real life. She has an adaptive onboard chameleon charger, which allows her to charge anywhere from 3 kilowatt per hour to 22, which allows you the flexibility to plug into any number of types of charging stations, and she will adapt and charge based on the power available. So again, the top 3 questions then apply to ZOE. She has a WLTP of 300, and she actually achieves 300 in the real world. Depending on driving style, as mentioned, but 300 is really quite robust. How long does it take for a full charge? So because she has this adaptability in her onboard charger, if you plug her into a 22 kilowatt hour power supply, she can charge in under 3 hours. A more standard 7 kilowatt charger, it would take her about 6 hours to charge. For a full charge, again, 0 to 100%. And then how much does it charge? Well, she's got a bigger battery. So if you are paying the same cents per kilowatt hour, you're looking at an $8 to $16 for a full charge. Again, all depends on what you pay per kilowatt hour. So I mentioned range before can be a bit of a worry. Renault have several tools, I guess, within the vehicle that you can use to optimize your range, but also to reassure the driver. So the first one is the econometer, which actually shows your instantaneous battery consumption in kilowatts, but it provides extra info. So it actually calculates the remaining range based on your driving style, based on the last 50 kilometers that has been driven. It will calculate how much range is left based on your battery charge level, just as in your combustion engine car. Energy recovery system, I alluded to this earlier, but you get battery recharging when there is a strong deceleration. It reduces the use of the brakes, but also charges the battery. Preconditioning then is a system that can prepare your car for you before you set off in the morning by adjusting the cabin temperature to 21 degrees. So one of the things that we love to do on those hot, after a sticky overnight is get in the car and crank up the AC to cool the car down. That's one thing. Once your electric vehicle is unplugged, that's going to drain the battery quite quickly. So one thing you can do is actually, while your vehicle's been plugged in overnight, you can say, I'm going to need the car from 8 o'clock. And what will happen is Kangoo or ZOE will actually take a little bit of extra charge in the morning to lower the temperature in the cabin to 21 degrees. So that when you get in the car, it's comfortable and you don't have to crank the AC. And when you leave, that means the battery energy can be dedicated to getting you from A to B to C to D. And finally, then there's an eco mode. So this is available on our combustion engine vehicles as well. But what it does is it can increase the driving range by up to 10% by reducing the engine performance. So it limits your top speed, and it does have an impact on your torque. And it's very easy to activate. It's simply push a button located on the central console. Renault has a charging and installation standard, which we refer to as ZE Ready 1.4. It assures you, the customer, that the unit, wallbox, and vehicles are completely 100% compatible. And as it says here, JetCharge is our certified partner. But getting the right charger means that your business works most effectively as well. You know, you might find that you don't need to put in the most powerful charger because that's not the way you'll be using your fleet. And it's having that conversation with Renault or with JetCharge that will allow you to best decide how you're going to use the chargers for your vehicles. I wanted to, before David talks to us about his local experience, I just wanted to share different places that EVs have been used. Obviously, we have quite a few satisfied customers, I would hope. And we have car sharing schemes in Europe. We have ZE Madrid. They've ordered 500 ZOE. We have Autolib in Paris. We've had rental services use them. For example, Eurocar UK uses them for their deliver and collect service. In terms of leisure and nature, the Chateau de Versailles uses Kangoos and Twizy for their garden maintenance. Again, they have zero emissions and they make zero noise. So they are perfect for driving around the gardens and ensuring that they're not interrupting the visitors. We have, they've been used as airport fleets. Air New Zealand have taken delivery of a few, which reduces their carbon footprint on the tarmac. The avian industry having been one of those that was under pressure to reduce their carbon footprint. Logistics then, I guess an obvious one, given we have DHL on the line, but Norway Postal Service runs 240 units. La Poste in France runs 5,000. They're actually up to 7,000 now. I should have corrected that. And technical, we've got a lot of city maintenance services, for example, building maintenance, elevator maintenance, just running around the city. They find the Kangoo to be quite practical. Hospital ground deliveries I put there because electric vehicles allow you to think a little bit differently about your fleet and about opportunities. So hospital would be limited with combustion engine vehicles to say between 9 and 5, whereas because EVs don't emit and they're silent, you could actually run 24-hour deliveries within the hospital grounds because they will not disturb the patients on site. So it just allows you to think a little bit differently about your fleets. So finally, my last few slides is just the roadmap of where Renault is going. So tomorrow, we are seeking new opportunities. I mentioned Alliance Ventures before, and they've already invested in 11 startups and investment funds around the world, from a specialist in lithium-ion batteries to an autonomous driving company focused on level 4 self-driving. And then Transit, which is a multimodal transportation mobile app company. So really looking at how we can move the use of the car and the integration of the car and the lifestyle forward. Renault have also undertaken projects for wireless electric vehicle charging. The picture below is a Kangoo Z.E on a patch of track that allows them to drive and charge at the same time. Renault have also continually, over several years, presented many electric vehicle concept cars, which give us a vision of where they see electric vehicles in the future. We have the Easy Ultimo taxi, Easy Pod for last mile deliveries of people, Easy Pro for last mile deliveries of medium to large parcels, and Symbioz, which is a private electric vehicle but fully autonomous, almost like a lounge on wheels. And there are others. We have the Morphos, which was recently unveiled as a shared vehicle with sort of multiple owners, and an Easy Flex, which is a smaller version of the Easy Pro for local last mile deliveries. So needless to say, Renault see tomorrow's vehicles as electric in these smart charging systems where they're integrating the EV with the grid and electricity generation. And they have a couple of projects in the works, which if you're interested, I can talk to you more, but I will stop talking for now. But where they've integrated the car more widely into the grid and the electricity ecosystem. So that was hopefully not too fast, hopefully very informative, and I will pass you over to David to talk a little bit more about his experience locally.
If David doesn't cut in, we'll ask you a few questions first. There's plenty of questions there that are coming through, but in the meantime, if you can, Elena, we'll just ask some of these questions. There's a whole lot of, the first one is around the product stewardship of lithium-ion batteries and, repurposing and recycling. If you want to maybe address that one first.
Yep, so lithium-ion batteries, then Renault has committed to recycling them at the end of life. Our aim is to prolong their life as long as possible, which makes, I think, is self-explanatory. We see the batteries as lasting for about 8 to 10 years in terms of their viable life cycle. At that point, they have lost a certain level of capacity, which means they're probably no longer viable in cars. But that doesn't mean they don't have a valuable second life, which is what has been explored quite extensively by Renault in France. They have worked with a company called Connected Energy to put together a block of second-hand batteries to effectively create energy storage solutions, where the battery is repurposed for a second life, which could almost double, if not beyond, more than double the life of the battery. So it makes very effective use of the battery beyond its purpose in a car. I hope that answers the question.
For sure. There's sort of related questions as well around how to optimize battery life and also the battery warranty. So how's the battery warranty constructed? Is it just on mileage or is sort of cycling and throughput considered? So the first one optimization and the second one around.
So optimization of the battery in terms of life cycle, our experience shows that because of its nature as a lithium-ion battery, it's good to do regular, steady, low-power charges of the battery. So rather than wait until I guess it depends how people use their fuel. I was going to make a similarity there with your petrol engine, but you would regularly top up the energy in the battery rather than wait for it to get down to 0% to then give it a full charge up to 100. We would recommend charging it when it's between 30 and 80%. That's one way to prolong the life of the battery and to optimize its time. That's probably one of the main ways to optimize the length of the battery. But in terms of warranty, then, so I mentioned we have a 5-year 100,000. There is also a state of health level that's given within the warranty that we, if you feel that the battery is not delivering 75% of what it delivered when it was first, when the vehicle was new, then Renault deems that to be a battery that's not really fit in a vehicle. So we would test that. And if that battery is not delivering that 75% state of charge or state of health, I should say, that under warranty would result in a replacement battery. So it's not just distance.
Great. Yeah, I know from visiting the guys in France that these batteries are lasting a lot longer than people ever imagined they would, and performing better than people they thought they would.
Yeah.
So there's a question around micro-learning. There's a resource for frontline staff which will help educate potential buyers. So, if you looked at any learning processes for third parties, and I think that's coming from it is coming from a supplier, so not from a customer. So I think what he's saying is there any supply chain education that you're looking at?
Supply chain education.
Sorry, I think he's from a battery manufacturer, so I assume he's saying helping the manufacturers of other products. So I think he's a battery manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
To on-sell the products, so education to the supplier community and others about the products.
About the products available for batteries in the second life scenario?
Yeah, I think so.
That's really a market or an industry that has great potential in Australia that probably is really in its infancy, I would suggest at the moment, because of the low level of electric vehicles here and the fact that the market is still quite young. As I was saying, vehicles were launched back in 2011 in Europe, so they're starting to get those batteries that they can use and recycle them and repurpose them for a second life. Australia is not quite at that point yet. So that's probably an industry that has well, I'd say, potential for growth.
Right.
In terms of education, yeah.
Yeah, so sort of a bit of a technical question. Will strong deceleration do brake lights come on?
This is not the first time I've had the question, and you'd think I would remember the answer from previously. I do believe on the Kangoo it does, because the Kangoo has slightly stronger deceleration impact than ZOE. So yes, I think on Kangoo it does, but I'm afraid I can't say with 100% certainty.
There's a question here around the different brands of charging stations and whether to sort of settle on one. I think you mentioned ChargeFox or Charge, and I think Cecilia from Wingan Shire Council is asking, if they have a mix of EVs, should they have to install a number of different charging technologies? How do they go about that from a charging infrastructure perspective?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it becomes like the plug that we know is on every Australian appliance. Whatever you choose to install should work with the infrastructure that you put in. The Renault, so JetCharge is the installer. In Australia, we recommend a Schneider. box, whether it be a public charge box for car parks or a more private one for the garage. That said, in Europe, there are many brands that have worked with Renault to be compatible with the vehicle. And at the end of the day, it's the plug that you can plug in to the vehicle that is most likely to work. That sounds bad. It's a standard plug on every electric vehicle. Just as on every Australian appliance, there is a plug that you know will plug into your kitchen. So if you are installing charging infrastructure, it will work as long as the plug is compatible. That said, if you want the best solution for a particular model, it might be best to go with the recommended supplier. But that doesn't mean down the line, whatever you have in your fleet today is likely to change in 10 years' time. So you don't want to have to change your charging unit every 10 years. I understand that as a concern. And again, as long as the plug is the same, which now that Australia has chosen a standard plug, it will be, the vehicle should charge.
Right. Okay. There's a fair few questions here around vehicle to grid and capabilities around bidirectional charging.
Yep.
Is that sort of on the roadmap? I think you did mention it.
That is on the roadmap. Vehicle to grid and bidirectional charging. So that's already, it's definitely on the roadmap. Renault has talked about vehicles will actually be, one of the pilots they're doing on an island is that in France is that the vehicles, they're plugged in when the building, so there are solar panels on the roof, the building uses the energy from the solar panels. If there is excess energy being generated by those solar panels that are not being used in the building, that energy will go into the vehicles. So they are smart charging vehicles that help, I guess, optimize the generation of the energy. And then bidirectional is also, would be when you take that energy home and then you use it to charge your vehicle, your house in the evening, for example. The vehicle to grid, yes, they're both in our roadmap. At the moment, neither of the vehicles here, so Kangoo Z.E and ZOE, are capable of vehicle to grid or grid to vehicle. Vehicle to grid, sorry.
And there's a sort of a slightly technical one here as well from Alan. SA government around CCS2 and the thinking process around not having that on the Kangoo Z.E. And is that going to be something on the roadmap as well?
CCS as in faster charging?
Yeah.
Yes. It is definitely something on the roadmap. So there is a new ZOE that launched just last year in Europe. We are keen to bring it to Australia. We are waiting for final confirmation, so we don't have a launch date yet. That vehicle would have CCS capabilities, so it's quite available already in Renault vehicles internationally.
And I guess the other question around that is, well, actually, Matt's just answered, will there be government pricing on EVs? So actually related to the last question you asked, where you mentioned about the products available overseas. I mean, what do you think we need to do in Australia in terms of making the Australian market more attractive for global manufacturers? Obviously, it's pretty well known we're not, particularly attractive, and there's not a huge amount of vehicle alternatives. And even when there are, there's not a huge focus generally. I mean, what is it that we need to be doing? We've got all these fleets on the line, and we've got lots of fleets as part of the program. What are the things we can be doing, either from a policy perspective, we've also got a lot of government on the line, or otherwise there's fleets to help sort of get manufacturers sort of excited and invigorated about the market?
Oh, well, I'd say Australia is definitely going in the right direction. You know, I've been working on electric vehicles now since 2012 or 2014, sorry, here in Australia. And in those last 5 years, we've seen leaps and bounds in terms of the interest in electric vehicles. And we've seen the number of EVs multiply in that time. So we're going in the right direction. I think more policies, more open discussions about priorities or emissions targets. They're all, the more noise there is around those elements, the more interest that the manufacturers will have, and the more they can see that there's a commitment to the development of that industry, or that channel, I guess. And then it will be sales. So, you know, if there's a specific type of vehicle that fleets are after, you know, talk to the manufacturers. You know, contact our fleet manager and let us know what you're looking for, because if we don't know that there's a demand for a certain type of vehicle, then we won't necessarily chase up that opportunity with our head office.
Great. Okay. Well, look, I think the other thing is around the regional servicing, and these are just general industry questions, not specifically targeted at you guys, but again, there's a lot of regional councils on the line, and I think, you know, one of the things we hear a lot is, you know, how do they, you know, make sure they can service? Obviously, EVs have less servicing requirement, but ultimately, you know, do you have any, I guess, ideas around that and how it can happen in the future?
Yes, so Renault Australia has a ZE network at the moment. I guess the dealers are mostly urban based in the key cities. In terms of helping or servicing for regional or, and rural councils, it's something that is probably, we would facilitate it, but it's something that we would discuss with each of the nearest ZE dealer, whether it's someone comes out to the area once a year. I put a caveat on that, in that it depends what servicing is required, because there are special tools and there are special processes required for servicing an EV vis-a-vis the battery and the 400 volt electric cabling system within it. But I'm sure that you'd come to an agreement where maybe they transport the vehicle, so the council sees the vehicle for 24, 36 hours, and the vehicle can get taken to the dealer and then bought back with a price that's agreed, and then it's just a very clear process that gets agreed upon at point of purchase.
Great. Look, I don't think we've got David back on, so I'm going to ask you some questions that I have been doing some work with DHL, so perhaps it would be useful. What are your thoughts around the last mile, I guess, electrification? So, you know, you've obviously got a range of vehicles, some of which might be able to be used for the last mile. Have you worked with any of those European use cases and case studies in terms of last mile and you know, some mixture of vehicles in terms of getting to that last mile?
So we've used Kangoo Z.E, as I mentioned, is used by the Australia Postal Service, the French Postal Service, La Poste, to the tune of 7,000 vehicles. So they're not quite last mile, but they're pretty close, because obviously they're much more, they're obviously denser in terms of use of the vehicle. They're also trialing that EZ Flex modular vehicle as an electric smart last mile delivery option. It's a huge opportunity. The last mile is generally, well, especially in urban environments, the most densely populated, the most densely what's the word I'm after? Well, populated in terms of vehicles as well, not just people. So an electric solution can be intelligent, is low emissions, is quiet. So you are delivering a solution for customers who are going to have an increasing demand for a personalized delivery solution that can deliver something well without compromising on their health and well-being.
And I guess another question on fleet specifically. A lot of our clients and those involved in this program are very kind of obviously, they really want data, and the connected future, obviously the ownership of data and the use of data is always very contentious. People, obviously have to often put in their own onboard diagnostics and other third-party products. I mean, in your view of the connected future, is there going to be sort of a way of accessing data more directly from manufacturers? Or do you think it will always be a sort of a third-party interface that happens with data? So particularly for fleets, I think that's quite a big one in terms of understanding how the vehicles are performing in different use cases, etc.
Yep, I think that'll depend on each fleet. Renault in Europe has software that can deliver data monitoring solutions from their vehicles, but for a fleet customer who runs many different manufacturers' vehicles, Renault providing a solution doesn't provide them with their whole visibility of their fleet. So I think that will depend on each customer.
Great. Okay. Look, I don't think there's too many more questions coming through. Is there anything you wanted to sort of say on behalf of DHL? Or because obviously what we'll do is we'll get David back on another occasion to do a dedicated webinar, and then I'll merge the two. Is there anything you'd like to say just in terms of things that experience with DHL or that particular program?
I would love to. Unfortunately, I haven't worked with David directly. He has worked with the Renault fleet department directly, so Philippe and our national fleet manager, Matt Howe. So I'm excited that they came on board. I mean, they're a company that has worked with Renault also in Europe. I was looking forward to hearing his feedback on the local
no problem
integration
Matt,
as well.
Matt, feel free to jump in if there's anything you'd like to say. I know Matt quite well. Is there anything you want to put on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you got me loud and clear. Okay. I guess just briefly, I guess DHL have probably started the process of adding these EV vehicles on their fleet in Australia probably 12 to 18 months ago. And I think they've got, it's about 5 or 6 Kangoos and a couple of ZOE vehicles as well, so on their fleet. So I guess I was curious to understand David's, get greater feedback from David as well today on how that project's been going. But they've probably been one of the earlier adopters for EVs in Australia in terms of the logistics space. So and obviously they certainly have a global appetite for going down the EV path. So it would have been great to have actually some greater detail from David. But it's been a pretty good trial from what I understand, and they've had some pretty good results. But maybe we'll allow him to elaborate that in greater detail.
Great, all right. So we'll get David back on, and thank you very much for coming on. And it's been really, really interesting, and obviously, hearing from a leader in the space and with global experience is always very useful locally. And this is, I guess, a series that we'll have on different manufacturers. We have had a couple in terms of Z.E Electric and others in the heavy vehicle space, and now it's really good to hear from some in other spaces like commercial passenger. So thank you very much again for coming on today. We've got a lot of these webinars coming up over the next few weeks and months given the corona situation. So please check back in and sign up for the program if you're not signed up on www.chargetogether.org. And if you do join, please also let your colleagues know. It's a good resource. If you are getting value out of it, please pass it on to others. We do have an ambition to grow the program quite a lot this year. So thanks everyone for attending today, and look forward to talking to you again next time.